Invited to a wedding no one saw coming, he returns to the place where it all began. What seemed like a perfect ceremony turns into the stage for an explosive truth. And the past they thought was buried comes back to collect its due. Welcome to the channel. Before we begin, give it a like and subscribe so we can continue creating stories like this one. The waters of the Mississippi River flowed slowly and murky that gray morning, reflecting the heavy clouds that covered the Valley of St. Christopher. In the distance, the bells of the Montgomery estate rang discreetly, marking the beginning of the day. Among the well-tended gardens and still drowsy stables, Lady Sarah Montgomery began her solitary routine of morning walks. Since the departure of her husband, Lord William Montgomery, and the estrangement of her adopted son, Robert, she found in repetition a silent remedy for the pain that solitude imposed on her. The Montgomery estate, one of the most prosperous in the Georgia region, rose majestically among intensely green hills and fields of blue agave. Lady Sarah, with her elegant bearing and serene gaze, was respected by everyone in the region. Widowed at 40, she had assumed with dignity the administration of the family lands and businesses, surprising many with her astuteness and determination in a world dominated by men. That day, however, something broke the usual rhythm of her routine. A metallic glint on the riverbank diverted her attention as she walked along the shore. Approaching cautiously, she made out a partially submerged body, wrapped in shreds of leather and linen darkened by dried blood. It was a young man. The pale skin, purple lips, and barely perceptible breathing indicated the serious condition he was in. Without thinking twice, she shouted for help. "Come quickly, there's an injured man." The workers of the estate, led by the faithful foreman Jack Ramirez, came running. Between several of them, they carried the unconscious young man and took him to the main house. "Lady Sarah, what should we do with him? He could be a bandit," whispered Hope, the housekeeper who had been in the family's service for more than 20 years. "Whoever he is, he needs help," Sarah replied firmly. "Prepare the room in the East Gallery and call Dr. Grayson immediately." For days, the young man remained unconscious in the elegant room decorated with ceramic tiles and mahogany furniture. Dr. Frederick Grayson, an old friend of the Montgomery family, visited the estate twice a day to monitor his condition. Rumors began to spread among the servants and workers. Who could the stranger be? Her fugitive farmhand, a young man of good family fallen from grace. Lady Sarah, however, felt something more. There was a disturbing calm in the young man's face, a familiarity that she couldn't explain. Something in his delicate but masculine features reminded her of someone, although she couldn't pinpoint who. After a week on a stormy night, the young man finally opened his eyes. Disoriented, he looked around without recognizing where he was. Lady Sarah, who was keeping vigil by his bed, leaned toward him. "Easy, you're safe. You're at the Montgomery estate." The young man tried to sit up, but the pain forced him to lie. "Back down." Who am I?" he asked in a weak voice, genuinely confused. "I was hoping you could tell me," she replied gently. During the following days, it became evident that the young man was suffering from amnesia. He only remembered disconnected fragments. A sword with a family shield engraved on it, a caped man being dragged by guards, a tearful woman begging him to flee. His name, or what he believed it was, did not appear in any registry of the nearby towns. However, despite his weakness, his refined manners betrayed a privileged education. He spoke like a cultured man and behaved with unusual discipline. "We'll call you Michael for now," decided Lady Sarah, "until you recover your memory." The name had a special meaning for her, as it was her brother's name, who had disappeared during the Civil War many years ago. As Michael regained his strength, he began to adapt to the rhythm of the estate. With humility, he asked Lady Sarah to allow him to work to compensate for her hospitality. She agreed, assigning him tasks in the stables, where he soon demonstrated an extraordinary skill with horses. The workers noticed his unaffected education, his way of riding, and his knowledge about equine lineages, uncommon in a simple farmhand. Even the suspicious foreman Jack had to admit that the young man had blessed hands for taming even the wildest stallions. One afternoon, While Lady Sarah was reviewing correspondence in the library, she received an unexpected letter. Mr. Edward Wilson, an old historian friend and archivist from New York City, announced his visit to consult old family documents for his research on the colonial era in Georgia. This pleased Lady Sarah, who appreciated cultured conversations and the news that visitors from the capital brought. "Hope, prepare the main room for Mr. Wilson. He'll arrive this weekend," she ordered her housekeeper, "and tell Josephine to prepare her best dishes. We'll have a special dinner." On the day of Mr. Wilson's arrival, the estate was dressed in gala. Oil lamps illuminated the central courtyard, where a long table had been set with the finest embroidered tablecloths. Michael, at Lady Sarah's request, had dressed in elegant clothes that had belonged to the late Lord William, and attended the dinner as a guest, not as a worker. When Mr. Wilson, a 60-year-old man with a grey mustache and lively eyes, entered the dining room, his gaze briefly met Michael's. The historian turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. During dinner, Mr. Wilson barely touched his food, repeatedly observing the young man discreetly. Finally, when the servants withdrew to bring dessert, he asked to speak privately with Lady Sarah. In the library, with the doors closed, Mr. Wilson spoke with a trembling voice. "Sarah, dear friend, where did this young man come from?" She told him the story of the rescue in the river and the amnesia. Mr. Wilson passed his hand over his face, visibly affected. "It's extraordinary. His resemblance to Alexander Rivers, the son of Mr. Richard Rivers. I knew him when he was just a teenager, before the disappearance of the entire family during the St. John's Creek uprising, 13 years ago." "The Rivers from Charleston?" asked Lady Sarah, feeling a chill run down her spine. "The same family that owned the silver mines and the estates that Frank Stewart now manages?" "The same," nodded Mr. Wilson. "It was rumored that young Alexander had managed to escape, but he was never found. Everyone gave him up for lost." Lady Sarah felt the floor moving beneath her feet. She had briefly known the Rivers family before the uprising. Suddenly, she remembered where she had seen those features before, in Richard Rivers' portrait that hung in the governor's house. Could it be possible that Michael was really Alexander Rivers, the missing heir? "Edward, we must be cautious. If he is who we think, there are powerful people who would prefer that he remained absent." Mr. Wilson nodded gravely. "Frank Stewart would not easily give up what he now considers his, and he has important allies in the regional government." They returned to the dining room. Lady Sarah observed Michael with new eyes. The young man was animatedly conversing with Louise, the young daughter of the administrator, who was clearly captivated by his manners and mysterious story. Could it be possible that fate had brought the lost heir of the Rivers to her door? And if so, what should she do now? The weeks following Mr. Wilson's visit passed with apparent normality at the Montgomery estate, but beneath the surface a current of intrigue was beginning to form. Lady Sarah, determined to discover the truth, had sent discreet letters to old acquaintances in Charleston and New York City, requesting information about the Rivers family and the events of the St. John's Creek uprising. Meanwhile, she carefully observed Michael, looking for signs that would confirm her suspicions. The young man continued adapting to life on the estate, dividing his time between working with the horses and long hours in the library, where he devoured books on history, literature, and science. His mind seemed hungry for knowledge, as if trying to fill the void of his lost memory. At night, however, he suffered terrible nightmares that left him screaming and sweating. "Fire. There's fire everywhere," he would murmur when hope came, to calm him. "A woman calls my name, but I can't remember what it is. There are men with torches." One afternoon, while helping repair a fence near the river where he had been found, Michael froze. A flock of birds suddenly took flight from the trees, and this simple event triggered a cascade of images in his mind. Himself, younger, fleeing. Among similar trees, the sound of horses' hooves pursuing him, a medallion torn from his neck. "Are you all right, Mr. Michael?" asked Thomas, a young farmhand who was working with him. Michael blinked several times, slowly returning to reality. "Yes, I just remembered something, I think." That night, during dinner, Michael told Lady Sarah about this recovered fragment of memory. She listened attentively, each detail confirming her suspicions. Tomorrow is market day in St. Christopher, she finally said. Perhaps a change of scenery, seeing new people, might help awaken more memories. Michael nodded enthusiastically at the idea. What neither of them knew was that Jack, the foreman, had overheard part of the conversation from the hallway. Jack, who in addition to working for Lady Sarah, maintained secret correspondence with Frank Stewart, the administrator of the former Rivers properties. Market day dawned bright and bustling. St. Christopher, a colonial town with a central plaza surrounded by arcades, filled each week with merchants and buyers from all over the region. Lady Sarah and Michael toured the stalls, stopping to admire textiles, taste fruits and converse with acquaintances. The presence of the unknown young man alongside the respected landowner generated curiosity and whispers. "They say he's her nephew from Savannah," some commented. "I heard she found him half dead." "In the river," others contradicted. "He has an air of nobility, look at how he walks." While they were buying typical sweets at a stall, an elderly female vendor looked fixedly at Michael and dropped the tray she was holding. "Holy Virgin," she exclaimed, crossing herself. "It's like seeing a ghost. You are identical to Mr. Richard Rivers when he was young." The plaza seemed to fall silent around them. Michael, confused, looked at the woman without understanding. "Did you know the Rivers, ma'am?" asked Lady Sarah with a calm but firm voice. "Of course, my child. I worked in the kitchen at Harmony Estate for 20 years, until that terrible day." The elderly woman interrupted herself, as if she had said too much. "We should talk privately," suggested Lady Sarah. "Michael, could you buy those spices we need? I'll wait for you at the church." When the young man moved away, the elderly woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Carmen, spoke in whispers. "It's young Alexander, isn't it? I would recognize him anywhere. He has his father's same eyes and his mother's smile, Mrs. Eleanor." "We're not sure," Sarah responded. "I found him injured, without memory, but each day more coincidences arise." The elderly woman nodded gravely. "Be careful, ma'am. If he is who I think, there are powerful people who would prefer he remained missing. Mr. Frank would not give up the lands without a fight." "What really happened that night, Mrs. Carmen? The newspapers spoke of an accident." The elderly woman shook her head. "It was no accident. Men arrived at midnight. There were politicians and businessmen envious of Mr. Richard's success, of his connections with the president. The uprising was just an excuse." Meanwhile, Michael wandered through the market with a strange sensation of familiarity. The smells, the colors, the voices, something in that town resonated within him. Passing in front of a silversmith's, an object caught his attention, a medallion similar to the one in his memory with an engraved shield. "Interested, young man?" asked the silversmith. "It's a replica of the medallions that the great families of the region used to wear. This one bears the Rivers family crest. A shame what happened to them. They were good people." Michael took the medallion with trembling hands. Upon touching it, a wave of images hit him with such force that he had to lean against the counter. "Are you all right, sir?" The silversmith's voice sounded distant. Michael now saw clearly a luxurious room, a man with a severe but kind face, putting an identical medallion around his neck. "This represents our history, Alexander," the man said. "Always wear it with pride and honor." "How much does it cost?" Michael asked in a hoarse voice. "For you, $50. Michael paid and put the medallion in his pocket. His heart was racing wildly. Alexander, was that his real name? Back at the estate, Lady Sarah and Michael shared their discoveries. The conversation with Mrs. Carmen had confirmed many of Sarah's suspicions, and Michael's reaction to the medallion seemed like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. If I really am Alexander Rivers, Michael reflected, what does that mean now? 13 years have passed. I don't even fully remember who I was. It means you have a past, an identity, Sarah responded softly, and possibly properties and rights that were taken from you. It also means danger, she added, her face turning serious. Frank Stewart is a powerful and influential man. He won't easily give up what he considers his. What neither of them knew was that at that precise moment, miles away in the luxurious mansion that once belonged to the Rivers family, Frank Stewart was reading an urgent message from his informant at the Montgomery estate. His face, normally impassive, contorted into a grimace of fury and concern. Alexander Rivers alive? Impossible. Stewart rose from his desk and walked to the window, contemplating the lands he had come to consider his own. "I thought that matter was resolved 13 years ago," he murmured to himself. He made a quick decision. He had to see the boy with his own eyes, and if he really was who he feared, he would have to act quickly. The next day, a formal invitation arrived at the Montgomery estate. Frank Stewart would offer a ball at his residence to celebrate the patron saint festival of St. Christopher, and requested the honor of the presence of Lady Sarah Montgomery and her young protégé. "It's a trap," said Lady Sarah after reading the invitation. "He wants to see you in person." "Then we should oblige him," Michael responded with determination. "If I am Alexander Rivers, I want to look in the eyes of the man who might have destroyed my family." As the sun set over the fields, tinting the sky orange and purple, Michael contemplated the medallion he had bought at the market. The Rivers family crest, with its 2 rampant lions and a crossed sword, seemed to awaken something deep within him, a sense of purpose, of responsibility. If he really was Alexander Rivers, he had a mission: to discover the truth about his family's fate and reclaim what rightfully belonged to him. But first he needed to remember. He needed to recover not only his name but also his history, and for that he would have to confront the people and places of his past, starting with Frank Stewart and Harmony Estate, his former home. That night, for the first time since he had been found in the river, Michael slept without nightmares. In his dreams, he rode freely through extensive green fields, with the medallion shining on his chest and a name resonating in his mind: Alexander Rivers. What neither Michael nor Lady Sarah could imagine was that fate had many more surprises in store for them. Among the guests at Frank Stewart's ball would be Louise Mercer, the administrator's daughter, who kept a secret that would change the course of this story forever. The night of the ball at Harmony Estate arrived wrapped in a mixture of expectation and fear. Lady Sarah's carriage advanced along the torchlit path, crossing fields that once belonged to the Rivers family. Michael, dressed in an elegant dark suit that had belonged to Lord William, silently contemplated the nocturnal landscape. Something in those hills, in the profile of the mountains silhouetted against the starry sky, awakened in him a sensation of déjà vu. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Lady Sarah, observing his tense face. "We don't know how Frank will react when he sees you." "I need to do it," he replied with determination. "Every place, every face could be the key that unlocks the padlocks of my memory." Harmony Estate rose majestically at the top of a hill, its pink stone walls illuminated by hundreds of lamps. The music of an orchestra floated in the air, while the guests, members of the regional high society, descended from their carriages. Upon entering the main hall, Michael felt short of breath. The walls covered with family portraits, the great marble staircase, the stained glass ceiling depicting a mythological scene. Everything provoked an avalanche of sensations in him. "I know this place," he whispered. "I've come down those stairs many times." Frank Stewart, a corpulent man of about 50, with perfectly combed salt and pepper hair and an impeccable suit, received them with a smile that did not reach his calculating eyes. "Lady Sarah, what an honor to have your presence. And this must be your protégé I've heard so much about." His eyes scrutinized Michael intensely, looking in his features for confirmation of his fears. "Michael, simply Michael for now," the young man replied, holding his gaze firmly. A tense silence formed between them, like two duelists measuring their opponent before the first shot. "Fascinating," Frank finally murmured. "You must tell me the story of how you met, but first, allow me to introduce you to some friends." The evening passed between music, superficial conversations and elegant dances, but beneath appearances, a subtle game of observation and strategy was developing. Frank did not separate from them, introducing them to important figures in politics and business, always attentive to Michael's reactions to names and places mentioned. To the young man's surprise, many of the older guests looked at him with expressions of bewilderment, as if they had seen a ghost. "Extraordinary resemblance," commented an elderly judge after being introduced. "If I didn't know it was impossible, I would swear I'm seeing young Alexander." "Same eyes, same way of holding his head," Frank quickly interrupted. "My dear Judge Ortiz, I think age plays tricks on us. The resemblance is casual, nothing more." Michael felt like he was walking on thin ice. Every corner of the estate was mysteriously familiar to him. He knew where the pantries were, recognized passageways, could even guess what was on the other side of certain doors. During a moment of rest, while Lady Sarah conversed with old acquaintances, Michael decided to explore the house drawn by a force he couldn't explain. His steps led him to a secluded wing of the mansion. In front of a carved wooden door, his heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, he took out the medallion he had bought and pressed it against a small indentation in the wood. The door opened, and with a click. It was a small private library, covered in dust as if no one had entered in years. Michael advanced between bookshelves, touching the spines with reverence. On a desk rested a diary locked with a key. As he tried to open it, he heard a voice behind him. "You shouldn't be here." He turned, startled. Louise Mercer, the daughter of the Montgomery Estate's administrator, was watching him from the door with an indecipherable expression. Her pale blue dress contrasted with the intense red of her lips. "Louise, you scared me. What are you doing here?" "The question is, what are you doing here in Richard Rivers' private study, a room that has remained closed for 13 years? Her eyes shone with a strange mixture of fear and expectation. "How did you open that door?" Michael showed the medallion, confused. "I don't know. It was instinctive." Louise closed the door behind her and approached. "I've been watching you since you arrived at the Montgomery estate. At first I thought it was impossible, but each day I'm more convinced." She took a breath. "You are Alexander Rivers." Michael looked at her, stupefied. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I was here that night," she replied in a broken voice. "My father worked for Mr. Richard as administrator before Frank took control. I was 12 years old, but I remember everything. We were friends, Alexander. We grew up together." A fragment of memory crossed Michael's mind. A dark-haired girl with braids running with him through the gardens, laughing as they hid from adults. "Louise," he murmured, the name suddenly acquiring a deep meaning. She continued, speaking hastily. "The night of the uprising, my father tried to help your family escape. He hid you in the wine cellar while Frank's men and his allies entered the house. When it was all over, he took you through secret passages to the river where a boat was waiting for you. But there was a confrontation. The boat capsized." Tears were running down Louise's cheeks. "My father believed he had lost you too. That guilt has consumed him for years. Does your father know who I am? He suspects. But he's afraid of being wrong, of creating false hopes. And even more, he fears Frank." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Quickly, Louise took the diary from the desk and gave it to Michael. "Hide it. It was your father's. The key is in the medallion." They barely had time to exit through a side door before Frank Stewart entered the study, accompanied by 2 men. They returned to the ballroom separately, feigning normality, but with their hearts beating wildly. The diary, hidden inside Michael's jacket, seemed to burn against his chest. For the rest of the evening, Michael observed Frank Stewart with new eyes. This man, so respected and powerful, could be responsible for the destruction of his family. Each smile, each cordial gesture hid years of lies and betrayal. When Lady Sarah and Michael finally said goodbye, Frank accompanied them to the door. His apparent cordiality had given way to a cold formality. "It has been a revealing night," he said, shaking Michael's hand with excessive force. "I hope we find more opportunities to get to know each other better." "I am sure we will," Michael replied, holding his gaze. In the carriage returning to the Montgomery estate, Michael told everything to Lady Sarah. His encounter with Louise, the memories that had surfaced as he toured the estate, the rescued diary. "This changes everything," she said thoughtfully. "If James Mercer was there that night, if he was a witness and participant, his testimony could be crucial. But Louise says he's afraid. With reason. Frank Stewart is not a man who forgives betrayals, and he has powerful allies. We must proceed with caution. That night, in the privacy of his room, Michael managed to open the diary using a small key hidden in the medallion. The pages, written in Richard Rivers' elegant calligraphy, revealed the story of the last months before the tragedy, the threats received, the political maneuvers of his enemies, his fears for the future of his family, and especially for his only son, Alexander. The last entry, dated the day of the uprising, was heartbreaking. If something happens to me, everything I have will be for Alexander. I have left hidden documents that will prove his right. The code is in our family motto, honor and loyalty above all. Frank suspects, but he doesn't know all our secrets. Alexander, if you ever read this and I am not here, seek out Thomas Oliver's in Richmond. He keeps the truth. Michael closed the diary, overwhelmed by emotion. There was no doubt now. He was Alexander Rivers, the heir to a fortune snatched through deception and violence. He felt as if two people inhabited his body: Michael, the young man without a past rescued from a river, and Alexander, son of a noble family with a history and a legacy to reclaim. At dawn, he made a decision. He needed to talk to James Mercer and then seek out this Thomas Oliver's in Richmond. If he wanted justice, he would need evidence, allies, and strategy. What he didn't know was that Frank Stewart had already initiated his counterattack. That same morning, while Michael was planning his next steps, a confidential message left Harmony Estate for important figures in the regional government. The imposter has appeared. It's time to implement our contingency plan. Dawn was barely breaking when Michael, or Alexander, as he was beginning to recognize himself, saddled one of the best horses at the Montgomery estate. He had left a brief note for Lady Sarah, explaining that he needed time to reflect, but did not mention his true purpose: to visit James Mercer at his small house on the outskirts of town. As he rode, the fresh morning breeze cleared his thoughts. His father's diary had awakened new memories, like pieces of a puzzle slowly forming a coherent image. He now remembered fragments of his childhood: horseback riding lessons with his father, history lessons with private tutors, the stories his mother read to him before bedtime. Happy memories that painfully contrasted with the images of that last night: shouts, fire, hands dragging him through dark passageways. The modest Mercer house was next to a small orchard, away from the bustle of the town. James Mercer, a man of about 60, grey-haired but still strong, was watering plants when he saw the rider approaching. Upon recognizing Michael, the color left his face. "I knew this day would come," he murmured, inviting him to dismount and enter the house. In the simple living room, with steaming cups of coffee between them, Alexander went straight to the point. "Mr. Mercer, I know you were there the night my family had disappeared. I need you to tell me everything." The elderly administrator looked at him deeply, searching in his features for confirmation of what his heart already knew. "You're the spitting image of your father at your age," he finally said. "I knew it from the first time I saw you at the Montgomery estate, but I was afraid I was seeing ghosts." "I'm not a ghost," Alexander replied, "although sometimes I feel like one, trapped between two lives, two identities." James Mercer sighed deeply and began his account. The night of the uprising had been meticulously planned by Frank Stewart and his allies. Using popular discontent and bribing local leaders, they had orchestrated an attack against Harmony Estate. The real objective was not political but economic: the silver mines, the estates, and the commercial connections of the Rivers. "Your father suspected something," continued Mercer. "He had begun to transfer documents and valuable objects to safe places. That night, when the attack began, he ordered me to take you out through the passage that led to the river, where a boat was waiting for us." His voice broke as he remembered. "We managed to reach the river, but several men were following us. In the confusion, the boat capsized. I lost you in the current. I spent months searching for you, but finally, I had to accept that we had lost you too." "What happened to my parents?" asked Alexander, although in his heart he feared the answer. "Officially, a tragic accident during the uprising, but those of us who were there know it wasn't so." The silence that followed weighed like lead. Finally, Alexander asked, "Do you know a man named Thomas Oliver's?" From Richmond? Mercer's eyes lit up. Of course. He was your father's personal lawyer and his closest friend. If anyone can help you prove who you are, it's him. But you must be careful. Frank has spies everywhere. After promising to stay in touch, Alexander said goodbye to Mercer and returned to the Montgomery estate, where Lady Sarah was waiting for him with a mixture of relief and concern. "I need to go to Richmond," he announced. "There's a man there who may have the evidence I need to claim my identity and my inheritance." "You won't go alone," she responded firmly. "This path is more dangerous than you imagine. Frank Stewart has connections at all levels of government and business." After a long discussion, they agreed on a plan. Lady Sarah would use her influence to get an invitation to an important reception in Richmond, where they would attend with the excuse of exploring business opportunities. Meanwhile, Alexander would discreetly seek out Thomas Oliver's. The news of their trip didn't take long to reach Frank Stewart's ears. His network of informants had grown over the years, extending like an invisible spider web throughout the region. A conversation overheard here, a message intercepted there, nothing escaped his attention. "So they're going to Richmond," he murmured to himself, contemplating the fire in his study. "Looking for Thomas Oliver's, no doubt." He made a quick decision. He would send his own men ahead. The old lawyer would have an unfortunate accident before he could meet with Alexander. On the eve of their departure to Richmond, Alexander received an unexpected visit. Louise Mercer arrived at the Montgomery estate with the pretext of delivering some documents, but her true purpose was to warn him. "Frank is furious," she whispered when they were alone. "I've never seen him like this. He has sent messengers to Richmond. I think he's planning something against you or whoever you're going to see there." "How do you know this?" "I work as his personal secretary 3 days a week. I've seen documents, overheard conversations. Be careful, Alexander." The sincere concern in her eyes moved the young man. At that moment, he remembered more clearly their childhood friendship. Afternoons playing hide-and-seek, sharing secrets, promising to always stay together. A deeper feeling was beginning to awaken between them, something that transcended friendship and shared memories. "Come with us," he proposed impulsively. "You know Frank's plans. You could help us." Louise turned pale. "My father, I can't." "Leave him alone. Frank would immediately suspect and could take reprisals against him." "I understand," Alexander replied, taking her hands. "But promise me you'll be careful. If Frank discovers you're helping us, don't fear for me. I know how to take care of myself." Her eyes shone with determination. "I've waited 13 years to see you return. I don't intend to lose you again." The farewell was brief, but intense. An embrace that said more than words, a silent promise to meet again. The next day, Lady Sarah and Alexander departed for Richmond in the most elegant carriage of the estate. The journey would last 2 days, crossing mountains and valleys. As he contemplated the changing landscape, Alexander reflected on the unexpected turns of his destiny. Weeks ago he was Michael, a man without a past or future, rescued from the waters by the kindness of a woman. Now he was Alexander Rivers, heir to a disputed fortune wrapped in a web of intrigue and with a clear purpose: justice. In Richmond, the second most important city in the East, they were received with the courtesies proper to high society. Sarah's invitation for the reception at the governor's residence had been accepted, and they lodged in an elegant inn in the historic centre. While Lady Sarah prepared for social obligations, Alexander discreetly began the search for Thomas Oliver's. It wasn't easy. The lawyer, they were informed, had retired years ago and lived in seclusion, seeing very few people. His address was almost a secret, protected by years of professional discretion. After numerous inquiries and strategic bribes, Alexander obtained the address, a modest but elegant house on the outskirts of the city. He decided to visit him that same afternoon, before the reception. What he didn't know was that others had also found that address before him. While his carriage advanced along the cobblestone streets, 2 men observed from the shadows, waiting for instructions. Thomas Oliver's house, surrounded by fruit trees and with a small pond in the garden, seemed a haven of peace. An elderly servant opened the door. and after hearing Alexander's name immediately led him to a study in the back. There, seated by the window, a man of about 70 was reading quietly. Upon seeing Alexander, the book slipped from his hands. "My God," he murmured in a trembling voice. "It's like seeing Richard come back to life." Introductions and explanations were not necessary. Thomas Olivers immediately recognized in Alexander the features of his old friend. With tears in his eyes, he stood up to embrace him. "We thought you were lost forever, boy. Your survival is a miracle." During the following hours, the lawyer confirmed everything Alexander had discovered and added crucial details. Richard Rivers, foreseeing problems, had left legal documents, wills, and evidence of suspicious transactions in the hands of his most trusted friend. "Your father knew that Frank coveted his properties," explained Olivers. "He had discovered that he was forging documents, diverting funds. He was preparing a legal case against him when the tragedy occurred." From a secret compartment in his desk, Olivers extracted a sealed package. "This belongs to you now. These are the original titles to the properties, your father's will, birth certificates, foreign bank accounts that Frank never discovered. With this, we can initiate the legal process to recover what is rightfully yours." Alexander took the package with trembling hands. "Do you think we have a chance?" "It won't be easy," the lawyer admitted. "Frank has consolidated his position over the years. He has judges and politicians in his pocket, but truth and justice have their own weight." As they conversed, neither noticed the shadows moving outside the house, silently surrounding it. The men sent by Frank Stewart had arrived too late to silence Olivers, but not to try to intercept Alexander and the valuable documents he now possessed. When he finally said goodbye to the lawyer, with the promise to return the next day to plan the legal strategy, Alexander went out to the garden and headed to his carriage. It was then that he noticed them, 3 men blocking the path with threatening expressions. Alexander stood motionless, quickly assessing the situation. The 3 men who blocked his way to the carriage did not try to hide their intentions. "Mr. Stewart sends his regards," said one of them, advancing with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "He asked us to escort you back to St. Christopher, and to take care of those documents you're carrying," added another, pointing to the package Alexander was holding. At that instant, the door of the house opened, and Thomas Olivers appeared with a shotgun in his hands. "This is private property," he announced in a firm voice that belied his age. "I suggest you leave immediately." The men hesitated, looking at each other. They had not counted on the intervention of the elderly lawyer. Taking advantage of that moment of hesitation, Alexander ran toward his carriage. The men reacted, but a warning shot in the air from Olivers stopped them momentarily. "Go, boy, we'll meet at the governor's reception." The coachman, alarmed by the shot, quickly moved the carriage forward. Alexander looked back as they drove away, seeing Olivers keeping Stewart's men at bay. His heart was racing as he pressed the package of documents against his chest. These papers were now his most powerful weapon, but they also made him a target. Upon arriving at the inn, he found Lady Sarah getting ready for the reception. Her face transformed upon seeing Alexander's agitated state. What happened? As Alexander recounted the encounter with Olivers and the subsequent incident, Lady Sarah's face became increasingly serious. "This has escalated faster than we expected," she said when he finished. "Frank must be desperate if he dares to send men to attack you in the middle of Richmond." "Which means we're on the right track," Alexander replied, showing her the package of documents. "Olivers has given me everything we need to initiate the legal process." After carefully hiding the documents in a secret compartment of his luggage, Alexander changed for the reception. Tonight would be crucial. Thomas Olivers had promised to meet them there, where he would introduce Alexander to influential people who could help in his cause. What neither of them knew was that Frank Stewart had also been invited to the reception. The governor's residence shone with lights and music. The elite of Richmond and distinguished visitors from all over America mingled in opulent halls. Lady Sarah and Alexander were received with the deference corresponding to their social position. As they toured the halls looking for Olivers, Alexander noticed curious glances. His resemblance to Richard Rivers did not go unnoticed among those who had known the family. "Mr. Olivers hasn't arrived yet," commented Lady Sarah after discreetly asking a servant. "Let's hope he hasn't had problems with those men." Alexander was beginning to worry when a commotion at the entrance caught his attention. Frank Stewart was making his entrance, accompanied by two men of official appearance. Their gazes crossed across the hall. Stewart's face reflected first surprise and then barely contained anger upon seeing Alexander. Without wasting time, he headed toward them, composing a false smile. "Lady Sarah, what a surprise to find you here," he said with false cordiality. "And I see your protégé is still with you. How persistent." "Mr. Stewart," she responded coldly, "I didn't know that Richmond affairs were of interest to you." "Oh, I have interests in many places," he replied, not taking his eyes off Alexander. "And I'm especially interested in protecting what is mine." Before the conversation could continue, the governor himself approached to greet them. He was a robust man, middle-aged, with the kind of face that immediately inspired confidence. "Lady Sarah, a pleasure to have you in our city. And this young man must be your protégé I've heard so much about." His intelligent eyes studied Alexander with interest. "Mr. Stewart was telling us yesterday about an impostor trying to pass himself off as the deceased heir of the Rivers. A fascinating story, although sad." Lady Sarah maintained her composure. "Governor Mason, allow me to introduce you to Alexander. He has been recovering at my estate after an unfortunate accident that caused him memory loss. Recently, we have discovered surprising evidence about his true identity." The governor raised his eyebrows, genuinely intrigued. "Really? I would love to hear more about that." "With all due respect, Governor," interrupted Frank, "we shouldn't give credit to fanciful stories. The Rivers family met a tragic end 13 years ago. Trying to revive them with imposters is disrespectful. Perhaps we should allow the facts and evidence to speak for themselves," intervened a new voice. Thomas Olivers had arrived, elegantly dressed and with an expression of serene determination. "Good evening." "Governor, Lady Sarah, excuse my tardiness." "Thomas," exclaimed the governor, "I didn't know you would be here tonight. I thought you had renounced social life." "Some occasions deserve exceptions," replied the lawyer, looking significantly at Alexander, "especially when justice is at stake." The tension was palpable. Frank Stewart seemed about to say something when they were interrupted by the announcement of dinner. The governor, diplomatic as always, invited everyone to accompany him to his table. "We will continue this fascinating conversation over dinner. I'm enormously interested in both versions of this story." During dinner, Alexander found himself seated between the governor and Thomas Olivers, directly across from Frank Stewart. It was like a chessboard set for the final move. As the dishes came and went, the conversation flowed from banal topics to more serious matters. Finally, the governor addressed the topic everyone was expecting. "So, young Alexander, you claim to be the lost heir of the Rivers?" "I didn't claim it until recently, sir," he responded with sincerity. "For years I didn't remember who I was. But thanks to Lady Sarah and people like Mr. Olivers, I've been able to reconstruct my past." "A convenient past," intervened Frank with disdain. "Appearing out of nowhere without proof, claiming one of the most important fortunes in the region." "On the contrary," replied Thomas Olivers, "we have solid evidence. Legal documents that Richard Rivers entrusted to me, testimonies from people who knew Alexander before his disappearance, even medical analyses that confirm certain birthmarks characteristic of the family." The governor seemed increasingly interested. "And why haven't you presented these proofs before a court?" "We will do so tomorrow," Olivers affirmed. "I have prepared all the necessary documents to initiate the legal process of restitution." Frank Stewart visibly paled. His hand trembled as he raised his wineglass. "All of this is absurd. The courts won't be fooled by documents that anyone could have falsified. Like the ones you presented to take control of the Rivers' properties after the tragedy?" Olivers asked softly. A sepulchral silence fell over the table. The blow had been accurate. The governor looked alternately at Frank and Olivers, understanding that he was witnessing a much deeper conflict than he had imagined. "Gentlemen, I believe this matter should be resolved in the courts, not at my table," he finally said. However, I must admit that I find the story of young Alexander convincing. Frank rose abruptly. "Excuse me, but I must withdraw. I remembered an urgent matter that requires my attention." He left the dining room with a rigid step, followed by his companions. Alexander exchanged glances with Lady Sarah and Oliver's. The first round had ended with their victory, but the battle was just beginning. After dinner, the governor invited Alexander to his private office. There, away from indiscreet ears, he heard the complete story, examined some of the documents that Oliver's had brought with him, and finally made a decision. "Young Rivers, your case seems legitimate to me. If the evidence you will present tomorrow is as convincing as what I have seen tonight, you have my support." It was more than they had hoped for. The support of the governor of Virginia would mean a devastating blow to Frank Stewart. Upon returning to the inn late at night, Alexander felt both euphoric and exhausted. Events had precipitated unexpectedly. Tomorrow, the legal process to recover his name and inheritance would officially begin. But his instinct told him that Frank Stewart would not give up so easily. Indeed, at that precise moment, in a lower category inn, Frank Stewart gathered his trusted men. His face, distorted by anger and fear, revealed the gravity of his situation. "We must prevent them from reaching the court tomorrow," he ordered. "Intercept the boy and Oliver's. Get those documents at any price." One of his men, more prudent than the others, expressed his concern. "Sir, after what happened tonight, the governor will be vigilant. If something happens to them now, suspicions will immediately fall on you." Frank hit the table in frustration. He knew it was true. His position, carefully built over years on lies and manipulations, was crumbling before his eyes. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Louise Mercer arrived, unexpectedly in Richmond. She had traveled without rest, driven by the urgency of her message. Upon being received by Lady Sarah and Alexander at the inn, her exhausted face reflected the gravity of the news she brought. "Frank is planning something desperate," she announced without preamble. "After you left, he sent messengers to his contacts in the government. He's trying to present documents that prove Alexander is an imposter trained by you to defraud him." "How do you know?" asked Lady Sarah. "I found drafts of the documents in his desk. They're forgeries, of course, but very convincing. And there's more. He's preparing accusations against both of you for conspiracy and fraud." The news was alarming, but not unexpected. "Frank is cornered," commented Alexander. "That makes him more dangerous than ever." They spent hours planning their strategy for the next day. With Louise providing inside details of Frank's operations, they refined their approach. They would not only present evidence of Alexander's identity, but also evidence of Frank's forgeries and manipulations over the last 13 years. Dawn found them determined and prepared. Thomas Oliver's arrived early, accompanied by 2 trusted notaries. The documents were organized, the statements prepared. They headed to the Palace of Justice where, as agreed, the governor was waiting for them with a trusted judge. The decisive moment had arrived. What none of them expected was to find Frank Stewart already there, smiling confidently alongside several judicial officers. He had an air of anticipated triumph that was disconcerting. "Ah, here is our young impostor and his accomplices," he announced upon seeing them enter, "just in time to face justice." Judge Ortiz, a man with a severe countenance, observed the scene with an impenetrable expression. "Lady Sarah Montgomery, Thomas Oliver's, and you, young man, who calls himself Alexander Rivers," he began formally. "You have been summoned to respond to serious accusations of fraud and conspiracy presented by Mr. Frank Stewart." Oliver's advanced with dignity. "Your Honor, we have come precisely to present incontestable evidence of the true identity of Alexander Rivers and of the fraudulent manipulations of Frank Stewart over the last 13 years. The judge nodded. "Both parties will be heard. We will proceed to an immediate preliminary hearing." The room quickly filled. The case had awakened the interest of the entire legal community of Richmond. During the following hours, a legal duel of epic proportions unfolded. Frank presented documents that proved Alexander was an imposter, testimonies from people who claimed that the real Alexander had been seen dead after the uprising, even a supposed expert who analyzed the physical differences between the present young man and Richard Rivers's son. Then it was Oliver's turn. With the precision and forcefulness accumulated in decades of legal practice, he presented the original documents kept by Richard Rivers, testimonies from former servants and friends of the family who recognized Alexander, and the most devastating evidence, documents proving that Frank had forged signatures, manipulated wills, and bribed officials to gain control of the Rivers properties. As the hearing progressed, Frank Stewart's face went from triumphalism to concern and finally to terror. When James Mercer, brought specially from St. Christopher, testified about the events of that night and his role in the rescue of young Alexander, the room filled with murmurs. The account of how he had tried to save his boss's son, the struggle in the river, the desperate search afterward. His testimony was so evidently genuine that it moved even the most skeptical. The final blow came when Louise Mercer, with a firm voice despite her evident nervousness, presented the drafts of the falsified documents she had found in Frank's desk, along with letters proving his recent conspiracies. Frank tried to interrupt, accusing her of theft and betrayal, but the judge silenced him with severity. After 7 hours of testimonies and evidence, Judge Ortiz withdrew to deliberate. The tension in the room was palpable. Alexander, seated between Lady Sarah and Louise, waited with his heart beating rapidly. All his future, his identity, his family legacy were at stake. Finally, the judge returned. The silence was instantaneous. After examining the evidence presented by both parties, he began formally, "I find that there is sufficient proof to determine that the young man present is indeed Alexander Rivers, legitimate son and heir of Richard and Eleanor Rivers." A murmur of amazement ran through the room. The judge continued, "Furthermore, I find preliminary evidence of serious irregularities in the actions of Mr. Frank Stewart after the tragedy of the Rivers family. Therefore, I order the immediate freezing of all disputed assets pending a complete investigation and the provisional restitution of legal identity and hereditary rights to Mr. Alexander Rivers." Frank Stewart rose, livid with fury. "This is a farce. You have been deceived by an impostor and his accomplices." Before he could continue, the judge ordered, "Mr. Stewart, I suggest you behave with dignity. You are already in enough legal trouble. Guards, escort Mr. Stewart out of the room." As Frank was being led towards the exit, he passed by Alexander. Their gazes crossed for an instant, Frank's loaded with hatred and defeat, Alexander's not with triumph but with a quiet certainty that justice was finally being done. Upon leaving the Palace of Justice, Alexander was received by a small crowd that had gathered as word spread about the sensational case. Amid embraces from Lady Sarah, handshakes from Oliver's, and emotional glances from Louise, he felt that he was finally closing one cycle and beginning another. "What will you do now?" asked Louise when they finally had a moment alone as they walked through the plaza gardens. Alexander contemplated the sunset over the towers of Richmond Cathedral before responding. "Rebuild. Not just my family's properties and businesses, but also their legacy of justice and honor. But I won't do it alone." He took Louise's hands in his. "For 13 years I lived without knowing who I was. Now that I know, I understand that the most important thing is not the name or possessions, but the people who accompany us on the journey." Louise's eyes shone with contained emotion. "Are you asking me to accompany you on that journey?" "If you want to," he replied with a smile. "After all, you were my first friend and my last thought before I was lost in that river. Perhaps fate separated us to teach us to value what we had." Her response was a kiss, tender and promising, that sealed not only the reconciliation with his past, but also the promise of a shared future. Months later, Harmony Estate once again shone in all its splendor. Alexander Rivers had officially returned as its rightful owner. Frank Stewart faced multiple judicial processes for fraud and forgery, while James Mercer had been appointed General Administrator of the Rivers properties, a position he occupied with pride and dedication. Lady Sarah Montgomery, who had been like a second mother to Alexander during his time as Michael, occupied a place of honor at the estate, respected and loved by all. And alongside Alexander, Sharing the direction of the recovered family fortune was Louise, now his fiancée. The story of the river's heir, as the people of the valley called him, was already told as a regional legend, the lost noble young man who returned to claim his inheritance and restore justice. But for Alexander, the true inheritance was not the lands or riches, but the lessons learned. That identity is forged both in memory and in present choices, that justice requires courage and perseverance, and that the heart, even wounded and forgotten, never loses the capacity to recognize those who truly matter. Dear listeners, we hope that Alexander and Louise's story has deeply moved you. This tale of lost and found identity, of love that transcends time and adversities, and of justice finally achieved, reminds us of the power of perseverance and truth. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you liked this story of the river's heir, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of American life with characters that reflect our own struggles and hopes. What did you think of Alexander's journey from amnesia to claiming